Welcome to ESGX Live, the global community for education and information to inspire collaboration and action on all things related to sustainability. And a very happy new year to you all. This is our first episode this year, so there may be a few gremlins as we go through. I hope not, but you never know. We have a great discussion coming up today where we dig yet further into the Global Handbook of Impact Investing. For those who have not yet seen this book, it is a massive, weighty tome. It is about this thick. The pages are thin. And it's designed to dip into, so you can really dig into one chapter at a time when that's relevant and interesting. So with that as an introduction, I will hand over to my co-host, Paul Herman in Chicago now, and move east from San Francisco. And Paul, over to you. I'm looking forward to this discussion very much.
Same here, Nigel. Happy New Year and healthy New Year to you and our community. Thank you for joining us here on ESGX. And we're about to hit the 2-year anniversary of ESGX coming up in March, on March 31st. So there's more than 60 episodes that you can find on the esgx.org site. And several of those episodes relate to the Global Handbook of Impact Investing that Nigel just showed visually, and that there's a link for in the chat. Part of the Global Handbook of Impact Investing is measuring impact and managing that impact and evaluating that impact. And there are whole fields that are dedicated to doing that. And 2 of the leaders and innovators in that field are with us today. So we have Courtney Bolinson, who's also a pioneer of a concept and a framework and an implementation methodology called Transformative Evaluation. It helps to measure inclusion. And Professor Donna Mertens from Gallaudet University, and now Professor Emeritus or Emerita. And so they're going to go deeper into case studies, how this applies in real life, how it's possible for you to do that in your own work across sectors, deep inside a sector, and how to apply it to the investment process, the discovery of new investments, the decision criteria of whether to invest or not, reporting on those investments, outcomes and impacts and results over time. So it's going to be super exciting, super informative. And then just one disclosure note, because we're talking about investing, remember that none of this is an investment recommendation. This is for your information and your education. So if you do have any investment advice you're seeking, please contact your investment professionals, advisors, tax accountants, and the like. All right, so let's dig in. Welcome to the stage, Courtney Bolinson and Dr. Donna Mertens. We're delighted to have you here today.
Thanks, Paul. It's so nice to be here.
And so tell us, let's hit the headline first. What is it? What is transformative evaluation?
Yeah, so transformative evaluation comes from the world of program evaluation that Donna and I each come from. And I feel like it might be helpful actually to frame who we are a little bit, so you know who we're talking to, who is talking to you today.
So I'll just please do, and of course, as always, in the audience, please feel free to add to the chat or to the question box, and we'll answer along the way. So over to you, Courtney.
Yeah, fantastic. So I'm an evaluation consultant, and I work with a variety of clients. One group of those clients are from the ecosystem of impact investing, social business, but I also have worked with more traditional evaluation clients like nonprofits, organizations, foundations. And so I kind of bring a lot of training from this field of program evaluation, and my goal is to bridge it over into this ecosystem of impact investing, because I think that there's a lot to offer and a really nice marriage there, which alludes to the title of our chapter that Donna and I wrote, which is, we think transformative evaluation and impact investing make a fruitful marriage. And Donna, maybe introduce yourself as well, so we know who's here.
Okay, well, I have been involved in the evaluation field. You probably won't believe it by looking at me, but for about 50 years now. And it is the field where I really cut my teeth on methodology. And I chose that because I wanted an action orientation that had evidence base through the systematic collection of data. But I also wanted an approach that would reflect the values of increasing economic, environmental, and social justice. And so for me, my lifelong challenge was to bring those together, that value system, which when Courtney introduced me into the world of impact investing, I found that there was a great alignment between what the impact investment community said were their goals and how I had conceptualized transformative evaluation. And so through my many years serving as the president of the American Evaluation Association and the editor of the Journal of Mixed Methods, and being a professor at Gallaudet University for over 30 years, I continue to seek ways to figure out, as Paul said, solving the puzzle, solving the problem with an action orientation, and how evaluation can bring a proactive perspective into decision-making in the impact investing community.
Fantastic. And I think maybe this would be a good time to pull up a poll that we put together, because we're really curious about who's present live on the call today to help us orient how we describe and kind of frame the conversation around evaluation. So if you just take a minute, we want to understand what's your experience with evaluation. Maybe you call it impact metrics, impact measurement and management, all of these concepts. Take a moment and add your vote so we know who's here.
So please register your experience with impact metrics or management or evaluation. Is it a new topic and you're just learning? Do you know some, but you haven't used it yet? Are you using it today? Your teams are using it, but not you. You're actively involved in it, but of course want to know more. That was why you're here. And part of that maybe it is your full-time focus and you want to learn more. So we'll give you another couple seconds to join in, and then Nick Gower, our producer, can show us the results and we can review them for a moment. So please check one of the 5 circles. All right, Nick, let's take a look. So today, as the results pop up, we have quite a mix. So about 15%, it's a new topic. Several people deeply involved, so 10%, sort of their full-time focus. A third of the people actively doing it, but you know, so a highly curious crowd today with some implementation, and some of them may share in the chat or the questions. So back to you, Courtney.
Fantastic. This is so helpful. So great. And the other thing that I wanted to do to kick off this conversation was actually play a video. And I think this video really contextualizes and motivates our topic today. And maybe I'll leave it at that. We'll play it and then I'll explain a little bit more behind the video.
Investors and business leaders have become powerful allies in solving our world's biggest social and environmental problems.
Tragically, ventures trying to solve a problem sometimes cause unintended harm, and often could be creating more positive impact with the resources they have.
The missing ingredient? Stakeholder engagement. It is the practice of amplifying the voices of those most directly affected.
We must ask the right questions to the right people and measure what matters to them.
We then listen and respond, designing solutions together.
The venture benefits and we gain a larger prize as well, a sustainable economy where all participants thrive.
Thanks to support from the OECD Global Action Initiative,
a group of organizations across 13 countries collaborated to highlight best practices for productive and meaningful stakeholder engagement.
Read and use these resources on our website and contribute your ideas.
Equip your organization with state-of-the-art practices.
Activate key levers of policy and capacity building.
Stake out a better world with stakeholder engagement.
Thank you so much, Nigel, for playing that. So I played the video because I think it does a good job of motivating why the private sector has an important role to play in addressing those world's most challenging and complex issues. I know a lot of us on the call are interested in the SDGs. Maybe you orient your work towards achieving a certain number of them. And these are amazing aspirations, and they can only be done if everyone plays their role, including the private sector. And the video really pulled out this concept of stakeholder engagement as the key ingredient. And to bridge that to our conversation on transformative evaluation today, meaningful and inclusive stakeholder engagement is an important part of this method and lens for doing evaluative work. So we're going to dig into more about what that is, but hopefully that video got you feeling excited and motivated to do this work with us. So maybe
and one more thing, Courtney, as you go through and explain it, connecting it to the investment process, I think it's going to be highly curious to. I see several people in the audience here, some with impact roles, some with investing roles. So the bridges between that, I know some of your examples will hone in on that.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, maybe we could pull up the slides. They're not really in any particular order. I actually think we could start with this one. So we did the poll because I kind of wanted to know where everyone was in the room and how you work with or understand impact measurement and evaluation. And I think often we tend to box evaluation as something that happens after the fact. So you make an investment, you design a business, you implement a project, and then you gather data that tells you something about your impact on the world. And one thing that Donna and I really want to get across, and that transformative evaluation is a great way to do this, is to think about evaluation as something that can be used at any stage of an investment cycle or a business cycle, or if you're coming from a more traditional impact space, maybe nonprofit, any stage of that work as well. And one of the things that evaluation offers beyond just a robust way to gather and analyze and report on data is this concept of evaluative thinking. And evaluative thinking is basically the concept of asking questions and then really reflecting on the answers in a way that then allows you to make decisions. So it might be a fancy way of talking about data-driven decision-making, but I think it's deeper than that. Evaluators can really help organizations, investors, anyone think about what questions they should be asking at a given stage of their work, who they should be talking to in order to get the full understanding of what that answer looks like, and then to think about all the nuanced ways that it might help you make decisions differently. So this is just one piece of evaluation I think is often lost in our conversations about impact measurement, but we think it's really important. So if you take nothing away from this webinar except this, it would be you can do evaluation at any stage of your work, and particularly transformative evaluation can be used at any stage of your work. And so maybe the next slide.
And just a quick logistics as the slides are up. There are ways to minimize your screen. If you have any boxes open on screen, you can turn those off. Sometimes you can double click where the slide is, or you can try a different view in the top right. But go ahead, Courtney.
Thanks, Paul. So yeah, finally getting to your question, what is it? What is transformative evaluation? It's a lens for evaluation that's really focused on social justice. It prioritizes the inclusion of vulnerable and marginalized groups. So maybe in a more general term, you can think about it as a process or methods for fostering inclusion and diversity in your work. That's one way to think about it. It's really distinct from other participatory approaches to impact measurement because it kind of brings a social justice element front and center. And it explicitly focuses on marginalized populations in order to do that effectively. And maybe, Donna, I'll let you chime in. This is your sweet spot.
Yeah, because, sometimes evaluation is thought about as something that you do at the end of a project. And I see that in the chat, we already have someone saying, yeah, you can do evaluation at any stage. And I do think that's what we're trying to talk about, is moving beyond that mindset of saying, okay, we already understand what the problem is. We know what the solution, we think this is the right one. So we're going to measure impact at the end and see if we accomplish that. But what if we took a quite different approach that said, do we really understand what that problem is and what the appropriate way of making that the impact investing decisions are? And is there a source of information that we can gain through understanding the context better, through engagement with stakeholders, as Courtney was saying? And it's not just engagement with stakeholders, it's saying who needs to be included, how can we include them in ways so that we are recognizing differences in power and access to the decision making, so that we're sure that we are being inclusive in ways that are culturally respectful and that value the knowledge that comes from those stakeholders. So we're doing that kind of critical analysis of who needs to be there and how can they be there in ways so that their contributions receive the value and attention that they deserve, so that we're actually doing things that have a hope of making a difference.
So Donna, a quick question. What would be an example of a question that doesn't do this? And how do you transform that upfront question of how it does is more transformative?
Okay, so if I know we haven't gotten to the examples at this point yet, but if you say that my goal in this investment impacting is, for example, to increase local employment, and then you say, okay, then I'm going to give this money to this, say it's in the field of agriculture, to this corporation, and they keep telling you, yes, we're going to increase local employment, but they never actually talk to the local farmers or to their families or to the support networks in that community to find out how to appropriately engage them in local employment. You could end up at the end and say, look, well, everybody told us that this was going well, but no local people actually got employed because the corporation brought in people from their own organization to do the work, and they're the ones who benefited from it.
All right, so it sounds like it was either lazy design or not even logical follow through to actually talk to the stakeholders, to presume what the stakeholders want rather than engaging with the stakeholders. Is that right?
Yes, and how many times do we see that when the presumption is made that I know what's good for this community that I am not a part of, but I have this expertise. I've maybe studied at the university and I have, this experience in international development. And yet we see decisions being made where economic development is put in place in the form of, for example, textile mills in Indonesia. And the result is the most polluted river in their country. And that's where the people get their water for bathing and for drinking and cooking and all of life. And that wasn't taken into consideration when that investment decision was made. So you have severe economic impact, you have severe social impact.
Well, this is a great question for both of you. So Chris Gassman's in the audience, recurring ESGX action-oriented person, evidence-based implementer. So his question is, can this be used in environmental justice to regenerate on that front, especially with stakeholders? And I'll just tack on a little second question to that is, since there's many people who claim to be climate skeptics, should they be part of this process? Like, won't that hamper the process, or will it help the process?
Well, the answer to the first question is quite simple. Yes, it can be used in environmental justice. It is being used in environmental justice. And the example that I used in Indonesia is one that I was actually a part of when I was working in Bandung in West Java. And so all of those issues around how does this impact the environment, not just the economy, but the social and health of the individuals in those communities? Does it address the priorities and values of those communities in ways that protect the environment? So the answer to that simply is yes. The second question is the one that's more complicated, and it gets into the politics of who do you engage with, how do you engage with them, and how can you be respectful, and including voices of people who say, you know, we should just move forward with this. It's important to know what those voices are saying, because they are going to have an impact in the choices that are made, the support that's given. If you look at just the contrast, say in Australia, where the mining situation is being promoted as the economic investment of the future, and it has implications to increase employment and do this and do that. You have those voices there. Those are the powerful political voices. But you also have to look at the indigenous voices and them saying, look, it's ruining our water. It's ruining our sacred spaces. And so bringing those voices in and saying, how do we, in a very explicit way, address these, what seem to be conflicting, and bring out the values that are underlying those, and look for solutions that are protective of the environment.
Great. And I just want to add on to that, one of the organizations that's done this is the City of Oakland. In putting together their climate action plan, the team there has made it an equitable climate action plan, or an ECAP, ECAP. And they, in each of the districts of the City of Oakland, did not just one, but 2 and 3 follow-ups in each district, where the people came, they were engaged in the idea generation. In some cases, they came up with ideas that weren't yet in the climate action plan. They also pointed out things that may not work or may not be important. So it sounds like those are key elements. Donna, is that right?
Yes, yes, I agree. That sounds like a very good example that we could get into more. Courtney, where do we go from here?
I was actually thinking of jumping in on the comment about, you know, how to engage folks who might have dissenting opinions, or even like aggressive type of reactions, or ways of engaging in a project. And I think one thing to note is that the process of doing a transformative evaluation and determining who should be brought in, how and when, is going to be different in every single situation, and it'll be different depending on what the evaluation goals are too. So, so if you're interested, so actually maybe I'll just dive into one of our examples that we were going to share about a social enterprise called Mshule. And this is a social enterprise. They're based in Kenya. They, in short, basically their business product is that they have a text messaging system that that enables primary age students to basically learn English and math using like this text message quizzing program. And so when we did a transformative evaluation with Mshule, we did a contextual analysis, which is basically a fancy term for taking the time to understand the context that Mshule was situated within. Who are the populations of interest? what is the historic context of similar types of businesses that have or have not taken off in the area? What's the history of the primary school system? One of the things we learned, around that was that they'd actually just transitioned to an entire new curriculum, and sort of the political history behind that was really interesting and informative for the evaluation design. So after doing a contextual analysis, we got a really good sense of who was critical to bring in to our evaluation work to answer the specific evaluation questions we had, which wasn't everyone, right? So we didn't engage in that situation very high-level politicians, for example. That was really beyond the scope of who was going to be able to have a relevant and productive conversation with us and input into the information that we wanted for that evaluation. Rather, the focus of that evaluation was to help Schule demonstrate any early outcomes that they were experiencing, but also really understand their potential for later impact. Schule was a seed stage business, so they didn't have a lot of data to share at that time to talk about their impact. So we really wanted to use a transformative evaluation to assess the business's cultural responsiveness and kind of use that as a sort of a proxy for being able to talk about the type of future impact that we think they would be able to have as the business grows. And so the people that we involved in those conversations were students themselves, parents, teachers, directors at the schools, and we kind of pulled from school areas that were representative of the Kenyan population, but made sure that we were including the neighborhoods that were more marginalized. So that's just kind of going off of your question, Paul. I think there are times when, like Donna said, it's really important to bring those types of people into the conversation. And there are other times where it's not actually relevant.
And I think one of the things that came out of that evaluation is when we talk about transformation, what are we talking about? And Schule said, wow, the transformation for us was that we had never really established those relationships with the school or with the parents. We had never actually gotten direct feedback from students who were using this app. And so the impact can be looked at as an increase in educational level, but it can also be looked at as a change in relationships, something where you're building something for the future. And then the realization by Schule that although their goal was to help those most at risk in the educational system, they weren't actually reaching that level because there was a small fee attached. And to the people at Schule, it was like, well, this is very, very small. Parents should be able to afford this if they value education. But some parents really are living at that level of saying, do we have enough money to feed the kids? Can we even keep them in school? And so then they said, maybe we need to adjust our business model a little bit to bring in some financial support from alternative sources that can support those families, parents, and students who really are the ones who are most at risk. And so seeing these kind of transformations through the process of applying the evaluation framework, to me, is equally important as to being able to measure impact, a change of behaviors, a change in incomes, educational levels, or those kinds of things.
And how did this relate to Engineers Without Borders?
Yeah, so this was really interesting. So Engineers Without Borders is a seed stage investor. That's one aspect of their broad programming that they do. And so they were coming up against the same kind of challenges that Schule was having as a seed stage business, where if you're a seed stage impact investor, you want to be able to talk about the impact of your portfolio, but your portfolio is a bunch of seed stage businesses that don't have the demonstrative data yet to talk about impact. So EWB was really the commissioner of what we referred to as a pilot. So that we actually really thought of this as a test. We were going to try out transformative evaluation and see where and how it might help both EWB and their investee, Schule, to gather the right kind of data that was available and useful for a business in that context. And so really the results of the design and process and results were really created in partnership with Schule. And so the results were used very specifically by Schule for their own sort of operational and strategic decision making. But it was also useful for Engineers Without Borders to be able to say something about one of their investees and why they felt like it was a good investment, and being able to bring evidence to bear to talk about that from an impact perspective. So that was really nice to be able to do both of those. And I just posted in the chat a link to, because we thought of this as a pilot, we really wanted to create like a learning material for others in the field to see truly step by step, how did we specifically do this so you could do it too. We're not hiding anything. You can see really clearly the steps that we took. And one that I'll point out as a really good example of something you could do, again, at pretty much any investing or business stage, is to put together a local advisory committee. So, and maybe you might hire an evaluator to help you build that, so that they kind of help take away some bias you might have about who should be on that committee. But to build out a committee, it could be very small, it could be sort of small, you don't want it to be massive, of representatives from different perspectives, populations, experiences in the context of your work, which is either, if you're a business, maybe it's the context of your product or service. If you're an investor, it might be the context of your portfolio focus areas, maybe the SDGs that you're interested in. So build that committee and involve them in and helping you think about whatever stage you're at. So, like Daniel in the chat's talking about, using evaluation right at the start when you're designing the impact thesis. Yes, you could use a local advisory committee to help you think through that as well. When you're designing your business product right at the start, building a local advisory committee. So this is a tool that we've used many times that I think is very easy for people to create.
And I think one of the other things that made it really special was that once we had put out a call for a project that wanted to be involved with us, members of the African Evaluation Association got in touch with us and said, how are you going to be responsive to Indigenous African evaluation? And so we were able to hire someone from the African Evaluation Association, a younger person who was mentored by a more senior expert in Africa. And that then Courtney and I worked with this team to have someone who was there on the ground, knowledgeable, grew up there, with mentoring from someone who understands evaluation in that context. So it wasn't a token representation from Africa, it was a substantial representation from Africa.
So it's very compelling to hear how it works. But there's also examples sometimes where it didn't work. So what would be some examples where it didn't work, and why? How did that happen? What was the root cause? How to avoid those problems in the future?
Okay, well, if we go to the example in Ghana, we have the Local Farmers Project. I don't know if Nigel can find that particular slide, but this was, and thanks, that is it. This was a project on impact investing farming project in Southeast Ghana. And they had three goals. One, reduce food insecurity, increase local employment, which I touched on before, and boost the productivity of local farmers. However, The project proceeded without engagement with the local farmers. The funds were given to entrepreneurs from Nigeria and Brazil, notice not Ghana. And the company's managers were given rent-free access to the farmland. The investing firm accepted that the project was a success because this entrepreneur company kept telling them, yeah, we're doing great. And yet they hadn't, when they did a post hoc analysis, which is the document that we were able to gain access to, it showed that no one from the village had been hired. No local entrepreneur got funds. The operations farming practices were not environmentally sustainable, and no funds were ever transferred to any of the villagers. So when hype is what's trying to convince someone that you've been successful at something, the use of an evaluation framework that says, well, wait a minute, who did you actually engage with and who did you give those funds to? So I think that's one of the examples in the impact investing where you're saying, hey, I mean, it's, sometimes my students would say to me, well, to me, it just seems common sense, like you would talk to those people. And I'm like, yes, you could say common sense, but my common sense is not someone else's common sense. So what we need to do is to have this framework that says, what are the values that are here and how are you engaging in that process so that it actually reflects those values?
Got it. And so in that example for Gutco, like where could it have shifted? Was it just the accountability of show it to me? Was it the questions that the board was asking? Like,
yeah, well, I think the people who gave the money to the entrepreneurs could have taken a step back and said, what's our policy position in terms of if we say these are the goals that we have, how are we ensuring that we're giving money to the right people for the right purposes? And that's really where transformative evaluation comes in. It would say what you need to do is engage with that local community, find out the goals that are important there. How can you have a culturally relevant impact? What are the power relationships that would need to change in order to have the voices of those farmers influence decisions and have data collection that actually documents that process? So I can give you another example of another impact investing that went sort of along the lines of transformative. We have some ideas of how they could have gone a little bit farther. But this is an example. If you can bring up the village capital example. This is one that it was designed to invest in female-founded or co-founded ventures in impact investing, and they wanted to be sure that they were giving the funds to female-founded or co-founded enterprises, and they also were interested in increasing the number of firms that were run by people of color, founded or run by people of color. And so they'd been in business for about 10 years without really looking critically at the processes that they were using. And so they decided, yeah, what we need to do is take that moment to say, how are we doing? Are we really accomplishing the goals that we said we wanted to start out with? And when they did that, they started by forming some relationships with other organizations that were interested in a similar concept of, are we really supporting women and people of color with impact investing? And then they formed partnerships and relationships with some of the people that they had funded so they could get that life experience of what happened with those people. And so that gave them the ability to see, where do we stand right now? And unfortunately for them, they saw that what they had been doing was not really funding a great deal in terms of female and people of color. And so they decided that they would have an intervention where they would set up a peer review process so that if they could have peers reviewing the applications that came in for funding, maybe that would result in a higher percentage of the funds going to female and people of color. And so they did that. And then after a period of time, they looked at the data and they said, you know, we are doing a whole lot better with women, but not so good with people of color. In fact, their data set showed that they had such a low percentage of people of color who were getting the funds that they couldn't even do anything with the data. And so while they had very consciously chosen a goal that I would consider to be a goal of equity in terms of who gets the funding, and they had systematically tried to explore this, that is to me a reflection of a transformative framing for the work that they're doing. But the steps that they didn't take were, if these applications that are coming from women and from people of color show that they're as strong economically, why are the funds being given to male-dominated firms? And so in order to address that, what they would need to do is take a few more steps that say, is there implicit bias? Do we need to do a different kind of training for the people who are reviewing the proposals? Do we need to do some capacity building for the people who are putting in the applications? So to me, those would be the kinds of questions that would arise from this kind of transformative approach. You're in the right ballpark saying, are we being equitable? How do you push that a little bit farther to say, what can we do in addition to what we've tried, because we know we're not making the mark that we want to make.
Got it. So Courtney has shared some web links in the chat that have toolkits. There's 2 different web links. Courtney, maybe you can explain. Reminder that you wrote a whole chapter about this in the Global Handbook of Impact Investing.
Yeah.
But you also have written other resources as well, right?
Yeah, I'd love to actually share. I'm going to drop this link in the chat. Going back to the video that we showed at the start of this webinar, that was a really interesting body of work that came out of that consortium of diverse actors in the impact investing ecosystem from 13 different countries. And on this website, you'll find a set of use cases. So they're basically short examples that talk about how different ways that you can do meaningful stakeholder engagement, specifically in an impact investing context. There's one focused on the SDGs. There's one coming from Transformative Evaluation. There's one focused on Indigenous methods. If you are working in communities where there are Indigenous populations, I really suggest taking a look at that use case. And I know that this is a global audience here for the ESGX webinars, so I just want to highlight that there are examples from Korea, from Japan, from Latin America, from South Africa. So there's really a nice diversity of what this type of work can look like in really different settings. There's also 2 white papers that you can find on that same website. That one is focused on capacity building, so recommendations and discussion around what types of capacities need to be built in order to do meaningful engagement well. And then also a white paper focused on policy, so at the sort of policy and governance level. What do we need to be thinking about when and how to do meaningful stakeholder engagement? So those are all free resources. Please use them, access them, and engage in this conversation, because we need more of us doing this work.
And then Courtney, I see like one of the links you posted, it says this is funded by the European Union. What proportion of the evaluation work happens with governments versus businesses versus nonprofits? Because one of the common either frustrations or gaps is making the time to do it, either having the time or making the time, and funding the people to do it. And so like in some investment segments today, it's becoming more and more prevalent to prove the impacts that you're claiming, or in public markets, the exchange commissions want to know that it's legitimate or authentic. So any guidance or tips or tricks on how to shift the mindset of traditional people that not only do transformative evaluation, but to resources?
Yes, I feel like this is really the key question, and was a topic of great discussion in that consortium, and really in many of the circles that I participate in, is who should be funding this work, and and to what extent should we be funding and prioritizing this work. I think we have to fund it, and because otherwise it doesn't happen. And so I think the best thing we can do is continue to publish examples where we're doing it, to basically to make those who aren't showing what they're doing, or talking about it, feel the pressure to do so. And I think that might start to build a peer pressure to really prioritize and fund this work. But it's a tough question to answer. I mean, I think anyone who values this work would say it must be funded, but we aren't always in power. Though some of you on the call probably are. So heed my call to prioritize this work.
Well, I think, to me, the big thing, I mean, it's like an elephant in the room that you love, is that the impact investing community says that we want these kinds of impacts. We want social, environmental, and economic impact. And so the big question is, how do you know that you've understood the problem correctly, and that you've come up with a solution, an intervention, an investment that's the right thing for that community? What are the factors that need to be considered? And so many organizations now are saying, yes, we want to increase diversity. Oh, yes, we have equity as a high goal. And, you have to ask, what does that mean? And how do you know how to move forward towards that goal, or towards those goals, so that you are looking at that intersection and not having an economic development that is destructive to the environment, but that you have something that is supportive of an increase in health. So that if you have farmers, they want to keep people in their communities, they don't want the young people to leave the communities, then what kind of jobs could be created in those local communities, rather than just saying, okay, what we're going to do is giving you more fertilizer and have you raise cows, because that just might not be the right solution. It might be a community where they know how to raise strawberries and coffee and the economic development that could engage youth might be in marketing and international marketing, and the exportation of products that could be processed in ways that would allow them to do that. And so that's that kind of engagement with stakeholders from the culture, from the local areas, that say, this is what's going to work for us. This is what is healthy. And not saying that there can't be inputs from people who have a lot of experience in terms of whatever it is, whether it's textiles or agriculture or whatever the economics are, but that you need that local input in order to ensure that what you say your goals are how you're actually moving forward. And I think that's the real strength of argument, of saying, look at this framework of transformative evaluation, see how it could be modified to work in your context. What kind of relationships, coalitions, collaboratives could be built? And those are not simple. There's always politics involved in them. There has to be a consciousness of power, of language differences, and all those kinds of things. But that's what the transformative framework offers, is a way of thinking through that process with examples of how it's been approached in a variety of contexts.
Yeah, that sounds very powerful. And then it has to engage humans, and humans have biases. And to logical people, this all sounds very logical, but some people are more emotional and visceral, or they have hidden or overt biases. So what other, I'll ask sort of a similar question the same, but like what other tips or tricks besides the logical brain can we tap into the emotional brain? Like sometimes we say, oh, well, if you had daughters, would you be biased against women, right? And so what are there other languaging or messaging, or is it just like a financial ROI that you can show more financial outcomes, more equality outcomes? Like what gets skeptics over the hurdle, and what can accelerate this?
Mm-hmm. Well, one of the methodological approaches that I have really been pushing is the mixed methods approach. So the collection of qualitative and quantitative data. And I think it is that qualitative data that sometimes can be very persuasive because it's the stories. It's the stories that include the emotions, the experiences of the human beings, of the animals, of the trees, of the water. It depends on which group you're working with. I work with a lot of Indigenous groups, and we talk about the connectedness and the spirituality, and understanding that respecting the connection that we have with the environment is a spiritual value. And when that value is violated, then it does violence. And it does violence not just to the trees and the water, but to the spirit and the soul of people. And so I think bringing that kind of qualitative data in to say, look, this is what's really happening. These are the lives that people are having. And that can be done in so many ways. I mean, sometimes when we think about qualitative, we think about, oh, okay, because you're doing interviews, or you're doing focus groups. But you can use photography, you can use video, you can do artwork, you can do performances. Some of the most powerful changes that I've seen have been through performances, which I will tell you, when I first heard about it as a methodology included in systematic inquiry, I was like, oh, that doesn't belong there. But then when I started using it in my practice and seeing how it can bring people to tears and it can bring people together, and they will say, I didn't know that we were sharing this. I didn't know that there were other people like me. We need to work together on this. So let's set up ways to do that. So you're right. You can't just use a rational, logical, quantitatively data-focused argument. You need that human side.
Yeah, it'd be great to see some of those performances, Donna, or see links to them. So if there's any to share, that it helps to fulfill the spectrum of humanity that we're all built in slightly different ways.
Can I tack something onto that, Paul?
Yes, please.
I think the other thing, and Donna alluded to this a bit earlier, but something else that transformative evaluation offers is that just the process of engaging people in a way that they haven't necessarily been engaged before, just flipping that power dynamic, allowing people to have a meaningful input into your evaluation process, helping co-interpret data, sharing back your results, where you are actually including in that report how the business is going to respond to what came out of the evaluation. I mean, those kinds of activities that are a part of transformative evaluation, I think that is like an emotional experience for the participants in the evaluation. That's transformation in and of itself. So that I think that's another part of doing this type of evaluation work that can be overlooked.
Yeah, understand. Because some people just are waiting to be asked and have never been asked.
Yeah, and doing it in a way where you actually show that you value their experiences and their knowledge and where they're at, their emotional responses in those contexts, respecting that. And I think that is one of those things that, you don't often see them in the methodology textbooks, but it's a skill that as an evaluator, if you can be the person who is pointing out, these things need to be considered. Let's look at this dynamic. How is this working? And actually collecting that kind of qualitative and quantitative data about the quality of those relationships and about whose voices are missing and what are we missing when we don't have those voices included. What needs to be done to bring people in, because sometimes there's a lack of trust. People get a lot of promises from government, from organizations, and then those promises don't come through. And so I understand that. Why are you going to say, okay, one more time? Sure, I'll come to a meeting, I'll fill in your survey, I'll do whatever. No, I want to know that you're really going to value what I have to say. And I think, as Courtney said, you move through that relationship building as a part of the process of establishing a transformative framework for evaluation. And it's not something that happens just at the beginning, but it's something that has to be continually looked at. And I think that's the other thing, because there are approaches to evaluation that will incorporate some of these kinds of strategies. So you can look at learning organizations, you can look at developmental evaluation, you can look at participatory evaluation. And I think what the transformative offers is that broader framework to say, do you have the right relationships? Are they culturally respectful? Are you addressing power issues? What do you understand about the context? Is there legislation? Is there a political environment here that's going to either support or make it more challenging? And then what kind of investment should we be making and tracking that to see its impacts, not just on economics, but on the environment, on social, on equity, on issues of diversity. So it's asking us to raise those other questions.
That makes me want to mention too, just to be super clear, transformative evaluation doesn't replace things like the 5 dimensions of impact from the Impact Management Project. It doesn't replace IRIS plus indicators. Like, there's all these great tools in the impact investing and impact measurement and management space. Transformative evaluation, it's a lens. So it's basically, you can take these tools like the lean data approach of 60 decibels, all of these tools in the sector, and you can apply the transformative lens to basically make those tools, to use them in a way that is more inclusive, that's like thinking about marginalized communities, that's putting social justice front and center. So I just want to make sure nobody leaves here today thinking that this is like another thing. It's something that you can layer on. So maybe I'll leave it at that.
All right. Well, fully supportive. I really appreciate your leadership, Courtney and Donna. Thanks for writing it down to have as resources for case studies and toolkits and examples. All of this is recorded, so to all the audience members, this will be available on the ESGX site shortly. So feel free to rewatch it, share it. If you need the links and you don't see them, please email us. Courtney and Donna have put their contact info, so if you want to collaborate, the ESGX community is big on collaboration and results and action. And so really want to thank both of you for your ongoing leadership, helping to make the world a better place through transformative evaluation. And as we wrap up, I want to thank our producer, Nick Gower, and my co-host, Nigel Lake. Nigel, would you like to wrap up?
Fantastic. Well, thank you both very much. I think that's been an incredibly interesting discussion, an enormous amount that in many ways seems just like good common sense, but it's amazing how often these things don't happen and how powerful it is if you apply this kind of thinking. There was one bit of discussion in the middle where we talked about access to finance, and it made me think a little bit closer to home and here in the US. And I remember we did a bit of analysis during the course of last year around access to finance in the US. So this data is all funding rounds captured in Crunchbase that there have ever been, and how many of those went to businesses that either had diversity as measured by some level of female participation in the owner group or management team, or people of color. And the green bars are women and the yellow bars are people of color. And the most important thing here is the scale, which is, you know, the best doesn't get much above 10%. And this is by number of funding rounds. So it hugely overemphasizes the very large number of angel and seed rounds captured. If you did this by value, these bars would be enormously smaller. And it's a great example of, you know, a lot of well-known organizations on this list talking about action on diversity and inclusion. But if you look at what happens to the dollars, it's still an enormously long way behind the talk. So just wanted to share that. A quick reminder to everybody, as Paul said, if you're watching this and you've enjoyed it, then please do use the like button and the share button. It means more people watch this. Every time you click that, 10 more people see the video. Almost exactly that number every time. And finally, looking ahead to next week, we have got a fantastic discussion coming up with our Green Jobs report and diving into what that means for all sorts of things about the environment we're working in, and particular things related to health. So very much look forward to that. If you've not registered, please visit esgx.org to do so. And we very much look forward to seeing you again soon.